Hey guys, welcome back to our small block Ford build. Thanks for joining us here on the third episode of the series. I'm Greg Jones, this is Chris Wright, and in case you guys didn't see the last episode, we got this small block Ford block from World Products all painted in a beautiful Ford blue. We got our Dura-Bond cam bearings all installed, and Chris, now we're ready for that next step, which is super critical, making sure we got things measured and spec'd correctly, and there were proper clearances for the rest of what we're going to be putting in the bottom end, as well as some file fitting on the rings, right?
Yep. Yeah, so, you know, one of the things we tend to make mistakes on is assumptions, right? So even though we buy parts and we get them all shipped in and we have the block all machined, then we make the assumption that, everybody did it to everything's within spec, right? So to have the proper tools and do your due diligence, which is checking to see what our piston-to-wall clearance is. Did this really get bored out to 4/125, or is it 5/10, tighter, looser, whichever? Okay, and don't get me wrong, it's not that we're looking to say there's a problem, but it's looking to know that crap, we may have a problem.
Yeah, you can't just assume.
You just assume, right?
Yep.
And so we're gonna look at the bore space here, or bore size, sorry, and take a look at that and verify, see where it's at, so we know. Make our notes. Check the size of the piston and the skirt, see what that is. Make those notes, okay? Yeah. Usually, I will say, Diamond does a really good job when they give you that piston card, okay? It's pretty much spot on for the most part, okay? Yeah. And then, then we got to check things like our bearing clearances on our mains and our rod, and check the crank. And so we got to check those things so we know what we're dealing with, because again, that's going to dictate, this is an iron block versus aluminum block. So what weight of oil do we want to run? So we're going to run a tighter clearance or a looser, clearance. So it's just a matter of, it's all engine builder preference and oil, and there's all kinds of theories and arguments you can get into on that stuff. But we're just here to verify, and you can see that process.
What do they say? If you assume, makes an ass out of you and me.
Right, exactly.
And so that's number one key in engine building, and so we're going to show you guys, making sure that we're all in spec on this small block Ford. So stay tuned.
So now we have our sun and dial bore gauge, which reads down to tenths. Okay, so obviously you got our setup fixture. So our bore is supposed to be 4/125. So now we're going to set this up to read 4/125, which I already did some of our stuff for us. So if you look here, I'm always kind of making sure that it settles right where I want it based on fitment. So you can adjust this. So this is a spacer for 4-inch. It's a precision machine part, okay? And then this dial indicator is magnified, so we can read it down into the tenths level, depending on what we want to set this gauge up for. So all we're doing is we're setting a zero reference, 4/125, so we know if we're plus or minus however many tenths. And that's it. In this case, we're all set. So let's go back to the block, and we will check to see how our bores look. All right, so now we just put our dial bore gauge in, and I'm only part way in just to verify. But see how you can see here. See where we set it to 4/125, and see where it bounces to? We're just about a tenth on the smaller side. See the minus? So we're about a tenth. That's pretty darn good. I don't think we're going to be complaining over that. And you can go down the bore and check, okay, and get it in here square. And you might have some taper to the bore, and again I'm playing with it a little bit, trying to get it square, and here's about 2/10. Okay, so you see there's a slight taper as you start up high and go down the bore just a little bit, and that can be just a honing process and all that. But we just like checking a couple of the bores just so we can get an idea that, okay, we're good, and that's how we do it. And it's interesting because I always like kind of checking around. And sometimes you'll see you might have 4/10. or 3/10. But if I come back up top here, and check that. So it has a slight variation between cylinders. I personally, as an engine builder, like to know that. Okay, it's for my details only. Customer's not going to know it, all right? But I'm going to know it. And and especially if we're doing R&D, I want to know, because if I'm going to do a teardown inspection and really evaluate my sealing, my rings, and look at the surface and look at everything, I want to know. And now you see the variation, okay, and why we file fit rings per cylinder. Because that 5/10, if it's 4/10 difference or 3/10 difference, that makes a difference on your ring gap. So you don't want to just use one cylinder. You want to file fit every single cylinder. So now that ring's actually fitted to that bore for sealing. All right. So we know, okay, we're a little bit on the tight side, anywhere from 1/10 to 3/10. Okay. So we'll make a note of that. We have it for our mindset, and now we'll go check the piston. So when you're measuring your piston, everybody has a little bit different spot where they tell you to measure the skirt at. Okay, in Diamond's case, it's basically from the bottom of the oil control groove down 850 thousandths. So it's roughly in line with in here. Okay, so you just take your mic and you go in here like so. I had it kind of set, but I'll just take it off, and you'll feel it, you know, just slightly get snug on you. And you're just looking for it. And this is a feel thing. And you just kind of like so. Okay. And then we just read our mic. So if you look, I kind of took a sheet, and you can kind of follow me over here real quick. But I had done this last night a bit, and I always do it multiple times. So I'll check a piston, and I'll change this, and I'll recheck it, and I'll do it, and I'll look at my average and what I'm looking at. And it's about 4120-ish is what this piston's at. Okay, so I got roughly 5 thou piston-to-wall clearance. Like I said, sometimes that's on the tighter side. Actually, if I really look at it, it's about, I'll call it 6, but if you look at where I'm at on some of these walls, I'm 3/10 tight. So I'm at like that 5. Diamond says 5.5 piston-to-wall clearance. That's their recommendation. In the racing world, we like to run things a bit tight, but if you're building a customer's engine, there's kind of that rule of thumb is if you run it tight, the whole world's going to know about it, but if you run it loose, only you're going to know about it, right? Because if you run it tight, that's when things can happen. If it's our own race engine and things that we're going to do for ourselves where we're trying to push the envelope and the limits, we're going to run things and see what we can get away with, right? So Diamond will give you a good recommendation based on this forging, this type of material, okay, and what the application is of what the piston-to-wall clearance should be, all right? And their recommendation is 5.5. So we're right around the 5 side, okay, 5.2, 5 thou, something like that. So we're right within spec. Okay, we're good. We know we're going to be fine. We could even be slightly looser and still be okay. All right, but you know, in this piston here, if you look at it, think about this for a minute. I mean, we get into pistons where this top ring, especially in like naturally aspirated, is way up here, and the skirt is real narrow, and this whole ring package is tightened up and moved way up high, and this pin is moved way up. So you know, you got a really thin area here depending on application. Likewise, the big nitro guys and all that, they'll have this bottom ring shoot, they'll have, you know, it'll be like that, and then this pin is way down, so they're like this, what we call compression height for the pin, you know, they might be 350, you know, where we try to be around 105, 110, 115, just depends on what we're doing, 120. You know, it varies just based on application. So, but we are within spec, we measured it, so we know our piston-to-wall clearance is good. So now we got to go and check what our main bearing looks like and see how that is. So now we're just going to do, again, we're doing preliminary check. So we're not going to be lubing our, you know, studs here. We're not torquing things down because we just want to get a good tight seal and put the bearings in, okay, I don't need to worry about necessarily my torque. I could torque it down, but there's really no reason to, because I'm getting a feel for how our clearances check out versus our crankshaft and our bearing journal. So we're just going to put this together simply. I don't like using, personally, I don't like using power tools when I'm doing assembly stuff. I do everything by hand. It's just the way I am. So everybody's a little different. I like to feel things as I'm doing stuff. You know, everything has a feel to it. So, and I just get it nice and snug and tight. And now I'm just looking. And this is interesting. Now, there are dial bore gauges, which I do have and we could set up. But this is kind of like snap ring pliers are easy for people to get their hands on, and you can go buy a set of these, and you can get yourself a set of mics, and you can just use snap ring pliers as opposed to the plastic gauge, okay? Because I like this because I can get down to tenths. Where plastic gauge, you're still kind of assuming it's really not the right way. Now you'll see in here, I've already got it pretty good, but this snap ring works out nicely because you just sort of loosen it up. Try and get in there as centered and parallel as you can, okay? And you'll feel just a slight bit of resistance on it if it's in there right. That's it. And then you just take it and you measure it out, which I was measuring rod journals last night. So you just spin this out. So it just clicks. So in this case, we're at 2,751. So if you read it, you're at 2 inches, 750 thousandths, and that one is just above. So now we got to rotate this and see where we line up, and we are roughly at 8 is where we're at. So I was looking at this last night, and it's falls into what I was coming up with last night. So if we check this, now we know where we're at, which is roughly 2750. And it can vary a couple tenths because depending on your snap ring gauge and all that, it could be a couple tenths variation. As long as, you know, I've measured it 4 times, I was in a couple tenths of being what I started with and what I ended with, and 4 times and a couple times the same. So I'll usually double check myself just because it's all feel and setup. I even will sometimes, if I'm questioning something, I'll have somebody else come in and do it just to get another set of hands and verify for my own peace of mind, okay? Because I just, you know, it's all personal stuff. You don't have to, but I just like doing it that way. So now we got to go check the crank. So this is tightened down. We know where we're at on this side of things, okay? Now we can go check our crankshaft. And just again, it's a feel. We just want to pick the high point, be parallel as we can with the surface, and it should nicely and simply have some slight drag, and we check it out. And so in this case, we are 2.7, it's not quite 50, so we're 0.050 plus 0.023, okay? So when we do our final checks, and you'll see here, which is from my notes last night, all right, that if we look at the crank main, all right, we were at a 2748, yeah, 9. And I did that 4 times in a row. All right, so I've been the same 4 times in a row. I'd say that's pretty accurate, okay, on this. So if you look at versus our cap main and our crank main, then we get a clearance somewhere in that 2,000ths range, right? So again, it just goes back to, you know, you might be off, you know, vary a couple tenths, but, you know, now everybody's got their rule of thumbs on bearing clearance because weight of oil matters, Material matters. Size of the journal matters. Okay, bigger the journal, the higher the bearing speed, all those kind of things. So you'll even see the factory spec setups. Like if you're looking at OEM stuff, you'll see the bearing clearance, you know, the mains might be tighter and the rods be a little looser. There's always a range. They always give you a range where they know if you're within that range, you're fine. And then there's a maximum tolerance point. You know, I was always raised, I mean, I was very fortunate with somebody like my old man who always was on the tight side of things, because he always looked at it as if you go on the higher number, you're already partway worn out. So let's tighten it up a bit. And especially with lubricants today and synthetic oils, now, you know, we're playing, look how tight they are, and the weight of oils have come down, and, you know, 0-20, all that kind of stuff, right? So, and you look at what they're running like 9/10. We just talked about 2 thou, you know, or they're running a thou half. Now, our high performance engines, you'll hear guys talk about, well, I'll run 3 to 4 thou on the main, but I got to run 78 oil, like the big, you know, nitro alcohol blown guys. We've never believed in that. My old man for 50 years built his engines super tight, and they were super durable in all kinds of marine applications, offshore boat racing, the highest levels of drag racing, okay? And we always ran tight. So everybody's different. Everybody's got their preference, but I know I'm good with 2. And that was my number in my head, as I was shooting for 2. Some people say, I want a little looser, and you can run with heavyweight oil. But I want to run a 530 oil, so that's what I want for this engine, so I'm going to run 2. So our mains are good. We just verified our bearing, okay, in the journal, and we just verified our crank. So now we got it on the mains. Now we got to check our rod, okay? You'll notice here I have 2 rods set up, okay? Basically, this just has a coated bearing. It's actually a little bit narrow bearing. This one's a standard, you know, HN style bearing, which is fine. This is typically what we run. And you'll see in just a second why I set us up with 2 rods and 2 different size bearings, okay? Because now you'll see, let's check this rod journal out. So again, same process, very straightforward. We're just gonna kind of put this in here. I got screwed all in. Because our rod mains are 2-100. We did a Chevy. That's pretty much a standard small block Chevy stuff, right? So we'll screw this in. All right. Just so we can get this down. And now we'll, again, you're just feeling that high point. Here it's dry and squeaky. But you gotta just be careful, because we don't want to. There you go, see? Like so. So let's see, 2, and we're not quite 100, we're just under it. So again, we're at 075 plus 024. So 075 plus 024 gives us 099. So we get 099 here. And how many tenths are we? Let's look at our tenths. We're about 3, which is, that's what I kept coming up with last night. So again, I did this last night. I verified that. Okay, I get anal about double checking, triple checking, quadruple checking dimensions on things. And I wrote it down multiple times, and I was always 2099, 3 or 2 tenths every time. So I know I'm at 2 or 3 tenths. Okay, so we're good on that. So now we got to get our snap gauge back out here and check our rod. And nice thing about the rod, you put it on the flat surface, and I'll just do it this way. You can do it with a bore gauge, you know, and set it all up. But for the average person who may have this, you just kind of set it in here. Now, this is one bearing right here for standard journal, okay? So one bearing, standard journal. Let's just kind of, we get a feel for it. And again, it's just about feel. And you'll see that it's just right like so. Okay, now we got to measure this. So we'll just make this easy. I'll come over here. So I always set that up like so. We'll take this out. Do I have a click? So it's 10. So we're at 2.102, all right, and 2.102 and an 8 tenths. 2.1028, 2.102, yeah, so that's what I was noticing last night, not far off. All right, I was like 1023, stuff like that. And so when you look at it, and actually I had Nicole come in and do it, and she got the same thing. So now if we look at our difference, what did we say? We said it was a 2 point. If we look at this, too many things out now in my hands. Let me get rid of that. All right. So we look at here and we go 2.0992, 2.0992 minus 2, what did I say? 2.1028, 2.1028. I don't like that. That's 3.6. I was getting 3 last night and 3.2. Okay. So could we get away with that? Yes, absolutely. I could totally leave this bearing as is and get away with it. I want it a little tighter. So I'm like, I want to go 1 under because I want to be closer to 2 to 2.5 on the rod. So I said, you know what? Hold on. Let me pull out a 1 under bearing. Okay. So this is a standard bearing. This is a 1 under bearing. Our journal is a standard journal, but I'm a little bit more clearance than what I want. So now I'm looking at it going, okay, let's do this. Let's reset that. Okay. And we'll get this as square as we can in here. And like I said, sometimes that's why I like feeling it come out. Okay. And then we'll do this. Now we are 2.101 and yeah, I'm getting 2. So we're at a difference, not quite, it's a little difference than a thou, but you get the drift. It's supposed to be a thou under. So now if we take a 2.1012, for example, okay, we look at our clear and we go 2.102, oops, my bad, nope, 2.1012 minus, we said 2.0992, and we're at 2 thou. So we're roughly 2 to 2.2, somewhere in there, okay? So that's what I kept coming up with last night as well. So we're back now. I got my mains and my rods. And 2, yeah, some people might say, 2 is just a little tight. But I want to, you know, for a 5W30, I don't know, I've been running it that way forever and making all kinds of power small block Chevys and Fords and all that kind of stuff. To give you a little tidbit, I run a lot tighter than most people would say on big blown alcohol engines, and I got that all from the experience of my dad and what he used to run. So what the standard is for a lot of builders and versus what he's always run, we go a little tighter and had no problems with durability or anything. So it's about trying to control the oil film, and that's a whole other topic for another time. Now that we know that we're going to go with a 1 under bearing, aside from that, we're going to look at our pin fit, because pin fit varies. We're going to talk about pin fit, and that's the clearance between the pin and the bushing, right? So, you know, when these come out of the box, they're usually on the tight side. Now, factory engine and what you can do, okay, it might be just fine and you might not have to touch them, but in a lot of cases, we still have to pin fit machine these to what we want, because this is a blown application. All right, we're running it under boost. So we usually have to change this. And so what it means is we have to have this machined in here. And in this particular case, everybody's got a different rule of thumb. In a lot of cases, we're anywhere from 0.8 to 1 thou 2, okay? And so when we do that, we go and check it on a rod machine. We have a gauge from Sonnen, which is very accurate down to tenths, okay? And we just can put this into the fixture and check it, and it'll tell us what this is. And in this case, we're like 1 thou 2, okay, for this twin supercharged application. And you'll find it'll last just fine and it'll be durable. And like I said, on the NA race engine stuff, like your circle track, road course stuff, we might be at 8 to 9 tenths. Okay, and then our blown application stuff at a thou 2, okay, is what we are. So that's a critical next step, and that's what we've checked. These are already done. We've already verified with a different type of fixture that these are a thou 2, just like they are supposed to be. All right, so now we'll come on to the step where we're just going to start file fitting, okay? So, it's a process when you're doing engines, and there's a lot of pre-work that you have to do when you're getting into assembly work, okay? And so now we're at the critical point of fixing and adjusting the gap where we want it. Because when you get these in the box, for example, this total seal ring, it's going to come and it's not going to be the gap you want for your application, typically. So in a lot of cases, you're going to put this in and you're going to notice that, like in this case, these particular rings, I can't even get them into the bore properly. Okay, so we got to take a bunch of material off of this. And as you're doing it, it's just a long and tedious process, okay? It's one of those things where patience wins, right? And so you have to just not be in a hurry. You kind of have to be left in your own world, so to speak, and left alone so you can focus on the task at hand and what you're doing. And so you're always looking at, as you start file fitting, and you'll see here I got a bunch of different feeler gauges, 22,000 down to 5,000, for example. And as the process goes, you're going to be going back and forth to your grinder, cutting and fitting these rings, and you're also going to have all kinds of different things you make so that you can make sure that the ring is square in the bore like you want it, just like it would be in the piston, okay? And typically, like in our case, I don't go buy this up. I just throw a chunk of aluminum up on the mill or some sort of composite material. I've got all kinds of things we've made, okay, to file fit rings with, to different bore sizes. And so being that this is a 4125 bore, you can look at, for example, Total Seal will give you kind of the rules or recommendations for how to figure out what kind of gap you want. And so basically when you're looking at it, you can use their formula, which is, for example, this is a boosted engine. So you might take a 0.0055 times bore size or a 0.0052. And every engine builder kind of has their application knowledge, right? Whether it's a supercharged engine, a nitrous engine, a turbo engine, whatever it may be. Bottom line is you're dealing with a cylinder pressure. I don't care what application it is. You're dealing with a certain amount of mass going into a cylinder. You're compressing that mass and you're trying to control it and use it. So the ring gaps become really critical because you don't want to be too tight because the heat and everything, you can burn up a ring or they can weld together on you and now you got a problem. You get too loose and now you got too much blow by going by the ring. So there's a balancing act. And then there's areas where you can be more cautious or not so cautious, right? So this is a very critical step to the sealing all those gases in your cylinder and using that to make power. And so it's a time-consuming, just tedious process. And you start with the top ring. Everybody has their way of doing it. I like to start with the top ring and do every top ring, and then I'll go and do every second ring, and then I'll verify the oil control ring just to make sure I got a gap that I want, okay? And like I said, every engine builder has the gap they like to see on rings. It's all personal preference. What they found works with a certain finish and a certain oil and all that kind of stuff. So we'll get ready. This is cylinder at the beginning. This is a Ford, okay? Ford goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And typically I'll file fit and I'll use my box with the pistons in it and I'll write on each one which goes to which bore, because as you saw earlier when we did our checking, bore size can vary by a few tenths. So when you're file fitting the rings, you want to do it by bore because in the machining process, they could vary a little bit. So you're trying to get the optimal gap per bore that this piston's going to be in, okay, in these rings. So based on our bore size, like in this case, it's a 4125. So 4.125 is our bore size on this. And looking at this ring, and the very first time when you sit here, for example, you can just put it into the bore. This ring has not been touched, and there is no gap. They actually overlap like this, right? They should be like this, but in this case, it's overlapping. So clearly we have to take a bunch of material off these rings to get it to the gap we want. And a lot of times what I've been finding so far with just a few that I've done here is, I'm starting off with taking off about 20 just to get a baseline, and then another 15 or so, and I'm about to where it needs to be. So 35 to 37-ish, somewhere in there, is about how much material is coming off of these rings right now. And that just is what it is. I mean, sometimes it's less, depending on the ring package and the bore size. Sometimes you may only have to take 5 off. There are rings for a specific bore, like the general Chevy, Ford market, whatever, your basic street engine stuff, that you can get rings that don't need file fitted. Okay, so, you know, it's just in our racing applications, obviously, and really high-end stuff, that's where you start to get really critical on a lot of little detail things, okay? So it's just about application, how it's going to be used, all of that. So you just got to take your time and do it, and it just takes time. That's all there is to it. Give yourself a bunch of time, and you're going to get interrupted, but it is what it is. So we'll start on this number 1 and get going.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching today. As you saw, Chris was doing a lot of great work here, making sure that we got all our measurements, all our specs, you know, properly fitted to put this thing together. And now, Chris, it's going to be on to the real exciting stuff. We're going to start putting in the rotating assembly and you know, getting our heads together and things like that. So.
Yeah, we got through some stuff here. It's always that tedious kind of BS stuff that we don't like to do necessarily, but
very important stuff.
Exactly.
Making sure this thing survives. And
yeah, if you got to do your checks, you got to know where you're at. Otherwise, you could have a problem. But
absolutely.
Now's the fun part. Now we get to put it all together. So
yeah,
start that.
It's going to be a badass engine, as you guys can probably tell at this point already. And Chris, as always, we want to thank all our component partners on this build. And of course, thanks to all you guys for tuning in today, and stay tuned for more. Thank you.